This is Retinoscopy Reflexes for V551, Ocular Motility and Refraction. There's a number of different aspects of retinoscopy reflexes that you'd want to be able to recognize by the end of this lecture. They're pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Those are the streak and the direction of the sweep dictates what we're actually measuring, or the meridian we're measuring. We want to be able to see with and against motion. We want to detect when the eye is at neutrality, or when we found the optimal focal position for the eye using retinoscopy. We want to recognize scissoring and also recognize irregular reflexes. For the retinoscopy reflex, when you're checking the horizontal axis, the streak is oriented in the vertical meridian and it's sweeping left-right across the horizontal axis. So the direction of the sweep is the axis that you're measuring. If you're sweeping horizontal, you're measuring the horizontal axis. If you're sweeping vertically, you're measuring the vertical axis. When we're measuring the vertical axis, the orientation is actually switched to the horizontal, so that the reflex or the retinoscopy light is actually imaged horizontally, but we are sweeping vertically. And that's true if we're measuring off axis too, at oblique or 30 degrees. The orientation of the beam is 90 degrees away from the sweep. So we're sweeping 90 degrees away from the axis of the retinoscopy. Now let's look at with and against motion. With and against motion is critical for detecting the amount of a prescription. So as we're sweeping across with motion, we'll see the beam in the pupil stay aligned with the beam on the iris at all times. So as we sweep across, they stay parallel to one another. However, when we see against motion, we see as we sweep across, the image starts to return in the pupil on the opposite side compared to where the reflex is on the iris. This is called against motion. Let's take a look at a video of that right now. At the top, we can see with motion, where the image slides across and the pupil stays aligned with the image on the reflex on the retina, on the iris. Against motion, on the other hand, is opposite. As we sweep that reflex across the pupil returns light in the opposite area of the pupil compared to where the reflex is on the iris. And this is against motion. So what does this motion tell us? It tells us whether to add plus or minus to the sphere power or the astigmatism power to neutralize the prescription. If we see with motion, we need to add plus power to the lenses. If we see against motion, we need to add minus to the lenses. And this is all with the sleeve down. All these motions are reversed if the sleeve is up. Whenever you see, though, with motion, think you need to add plus. When you see against motion, you need to add minus to the lenses, to the prescription. And we do that through the phoropter by spinning the sphere or cylinder power wheels. What about neutrality? How do we know we're reaching closer and closer to neutrality? When we're far away from neutrality, our retinoscopy reflex, we see a thin line. As we get closer to neutrality, that thin line starts to spread out and to fill up the pupil. When we reach neutrality, right when we're at the apex of the cornea, or the center of the iris and the pupil, we see a bright light that fills up the pupil. When we don't see that, we don't see anything at all. Now, when we're nowhere close to neutrality, it can also fill up the pupil, but it's a very dim, dull reflex compared to what we see at neutrality, which is a very bright flash of light, almost like a headlight coming on and off. So neutrality is when the retinoscopy reflex is at best focus. However, you still need to remove the working distance to get the true prescription. Well, what is skew or scissoring? We've talked about currently prescriptions when all the prescription, the astigmatism, axis, and power are all in the 90 and the 180. So we're sweeping in the horizontal and the vertical meridian. When the axis is not at 90 and 180, and we sweep across, what we see is scissoring. Scissoring is what we see here in the center image, where the bar of light has been shifted off by some degrees in a different direction. And that's telling us what the axis of that person's astigmatism, the primary planes of it, is. So what we need to first do is rotate the beam on the retinoscopy to be parallel to create a uniform line again. In this case, we'd be sweeping at approximately 60 degrees all along, as well as at 30 degrees. To do that, and to change our axis, we then rotate our power of our prescription using the axis knob. Finally, let's look at irregular astigmatism. At the top, we see a regular ret reflex, which has a thin line. If we ever see irregular astigmatism, that ret reflex now bends or breaks. And this is a sign of diseases like cataracts or keratoconus. Thank you.